just when you think you know someone. For 25 years we have been traveling through Johto, exploring its lands, and apparently been conceived by its lies. As a region, from a geographical standpoint, Johto has always been one of the most interesting ones, because it is right next to another region, and we know exactly where Johto ends and Kanto begins. It's as simple as crossing the water east of Newbark Town. And yet, when we find ourselves in the west of the region, and we cross the water there to find ourselves on a new landmass housing Cianwood City, it for some reason does not count as a new region. And if this was a smaller island like Cinnabar Island in Kanto, that'd be understandable. But no, Cyanwood City is only a small part of a presumably large island we never see the western side of. What is going on there? And is Cyanwood City even actually in Johto, or is it merely accessible from Johto, as we do in Gold Silver? Let's find out. I think the best way to start our investigation is by trying to map out what exactly the landmass Cyanwood City is located on, looks like, and what we know about it. And while that may sound very simple, it's actually everything but. While Johto itself has had a pretty consistent depiction all throughout Pokémon history, the same can absolutely not be said for this landmass. All the way back in 1999, this location, which I'm gonna call Cyanwood Island for the sake of convenience and to separate it from the city, was depicted as continuing beyond the borders of the map in-game. Its coloration was green, which suggests it isn't covered in mountains, like the northern side of the region, but instead perhaps forests or grasslands. We get more information thanks to the official artwork of the map, which indeed depicts the island with a similar biome as the mainland of Johto, with the key difference that Cyanwood City is actually a segmented beach, with a cliffside preventing travelers from easy access inland. This same design is also seen in-game, in both the originals as well as the remakes. From what we can tell, it's mountains, cliffs or hills that prevent us from exploring Cyanwood Island further. Also interesting to note is that the Gen 2 map artwork portrays Route 40 and 41 as a sort of bay, with another waterway that then continues towards the west. It makes Cyanwood Island resemble Cinnabar Island in a way, as a not super relevant landmass right next to the mainland. But that is surface level analysis. When we actually look at this artwork's version of Kanto, Cinnabar Island barely looks like an island. It's more of a rock than an actual landmass. And that fact puts Cyanwood Island in a completely new light. Even if this island isn't big enough to be its own region, it does appear to be a lot larger than the games give it credit for. A similar larger size can also be seen in the Johto map used in Pokémon Stadium 2, which is based on the artwork we saw before, but once again amplifies how much larger than just the city Cyanwood Island really is. As we continue in time, a new map of Johto for the Pokémon anime is created, which essentially serves as a more modern version of the artwork for Gen 2. It retains the bay look of the maps that came before it, but uses very conveniently placed clouds to mask even the slightest hint of the rest of the island. That would no longer be necessary going forward, because in HeartGold and Soul Silver we actually get to see more of what this island looks like. Newly added here is a way to enter the cliffside through the appropriately named Cliff Edge Gate, which then leads to Route 47, where we can find Cliff Cave and can immediately tell this is among the most untamed nature the Johto games have to offer. Route 48 is a lot more how we know Johto to be, a smaller green area with obvious human intervention, even if subtle. It then leads towards the newest landmark on Cyanwood Island, the Johto Safari Zone. Not a whole lot is known about the construction of this location. We merely know the owner is Boaba, the man behind the Kanto Safari Zone, and that the Safari Zone Gate, a small town around it, is actually the result of the success of the Safari Zone rather than having been built at the same time as the venue. Based on that, we can also deduce this location is not a town that previously existed but wasn't accessible. Now, knowing there's a Safari Zone on this island, suddenly everything could make sense. Surely it would explain the unexplored wilderness on the island, right? This is a nature preserve, which was initially off limits, but has now become accessible through means of the Safari Zone. Yes, Game Freak could have done that and explained this island away without complications. But that is not what they did. Instead, this Safari Zone works by constantly changing the landscapes around. How exactly this works in-game as a mechanic is a video topic in and of itself, so I won't dive too deep into that, but all you need to know is that in-universe, it is essentially explained as saying the Safari Zone has a certain amount of land to use, with workers who constantly switch out the biomes based on your preference. This is confirmed by 2 of those workers found in the Safari Zone gate. What this means is that the different biomes found in the Safari Zone are completely artificial and not areas actually found on the island. All this basically tells us is that a certain amount of land found on Cyanwood Island is reserved for the Safari Zone to use, but that's about all there is to it. In-game, that is. Because not only did the game world change for the remakes, the map artwork did as well. In the new art for HeartGold and Gold Silver, key changes are made to Cyanwood Island and the waters around it that put everything in a new perspective. Of course, the additional routes in the Safari Zone are added, but these extra details also bring rivers to the island. Probably the most interesting element though is that the island loses its bay or ocean-like feeling, instead seemingly having a river, channel or strait next to it to the north, which makes it a lot less like an island and more like an islet. Although it also now adds more of a possibility of this being a larger island horizontally. We can also clearly see the land allocated for the Safari Zone and how that is separated from the natural environment of the island. I also want to point out the sheer size of the landmass here. Place it over Johto and it covers basically the entire central part of the region, and it's only the land we can actually see. Who knows how much more is to its west? And until Game Freak revisits Johto in a major way and actually expands on the region, which is probably most likely to happen in a Legend Celebi at this point, we won't know for certain what it's like in the Pokemon world. But we can make an educated guess. You see, Johto is based on the real-life Kansai region in southern Japan, which, just like the fictional one, is located and often contrasted with Kanto, which has the same name in real life and in Pokemon. Kansai has a similar shape to Johto, so it's clearly the inspiration here, which then makes Cyanwood Island based on the nearby real-life island of Shikoku. And Shikoku is really big. It's about half the size of Kanto and Kansai, so if we assume that it's the same in Pokemon, then there is a lot of the island still hidden to the west. Maybe not enough to be its completely own region, especially if it's all wilderness, but it could make for a very fitting DLC area, kinda like Galar had with the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra. But it also leads us back to the main question of this video. Is Cianwood City or island really part of Johto? In real life, the answer is no. Shikoku is its own region based on every single metric. It's not considered part of Kansai whatsoever. In universe, the answer is not so simple though. While real-life Shikoku has 4 million people living on it and several large cities scattered all over the island, all we know about Cyanwood Island is the presence of Cianwood City, which is far from a metropole and more depicted like a peaceful port town, and Safari Zone Gate, which is one of the smallest towns in Johto. Not to mention that both rely very strongly on mainland Johto for things like their economy and cultural identity. Cyanwood City has a strong connection with Olivine City, while the Safari Zone Gate is merely a tourist haven. When we look at the native wildlife of Cyanwood Island, we find a further connection to Johto. Obviously, all Pokemon we know are found here are confined to the Dex as it existed in Gen 4, but what I would consider very noteworthy is that Route 45, 46, Cliff Cave and the water surrounding Cyanwood City all have 0 unique wild Pokemon to be found there. Every single mon you can catch in the wild on or near Cyanwood Island is also found on mainland Johto. Safari Zone notwithstanding, those Pokemon are probably imported. It suggests a stronger connection to Johto also from an environmental perspective, although there is still an important factor to consider: the embedded tower. It is our only hint towards the history and potential cultural significance of Cyanwood Island, because it's said that this tower, embedded in the cliffside, hence the name, was created by ancient people from Hoenn, who apparently somehow made their way to this island. In-game you find Groudon, Kyogre and Rayquaza here, which are the only 3 Pokemon found on the island that aren't native to Johto. This still doesn't say much. The powers of legendary Pokemon have often shown to be incomprehensible in the sense that they don't even need to necessarily live here permanently in order to appear. But it does show that while modern Cyanwood Island has connections with Johto, ancient Cyanwood Island might have been more under the influence of Hoenn. If we take the real-life map of Japan as gospel, Hoenn is what is eventually found to the west of the island, so folks from that region making their way here is fully possible. And that's kind of the funny thing here. Say that if Cyanwood Island was to be mirrored, so Cyanwood City would be on the west side rather than the east, it would most likely be a part of Hoenn instead of Johto. It shows how frail the connection to the region we associate it with is. The only reason we consider it part of Johto is for lack of a better alternative. All it could possibly take is one revisit to Johto for Cyanwood to properly have its home island expanded to the point it gets an actual name. So for now, I guess calling it part of Johto is the easiest way to go about. And in universe, I suspect the inhabitants of Cianwood City to consider themselves Johtonians. Whether they actually are though, that is something that's a lot less certain than you might think. But what do you guys think? Will we ever learn what Cyanwood Island looks like in full? And if so, what would you like the island to house? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Pokemon content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.